They said I was nothing, and for a moment, I believed them. The wine glass in front of me shimmered under the chandelier's glare. It was the only thing that caught the light. Everything else about this dinner was shadow and porcelain smiles. My black heels, polished and silent, were planted beneath my mother's custom oak table, the same pair I wore sprinting through a dust storm in Kabul with an injured translator on my back. Here, in this room, they were demoted to decoration. Emily sat beside me, her fingers grazing the edge of her water glass like she was waiting for an excuse to disappear. She hadn't said much since I arrived. Brandon, on the other hand, had taken up enough conversational oxygen for the entire block. His voice rang with self-assurance as he recounted his campaign's newest poll numbers, complete with a knowing chuckle each time Mother nodded with theatrical pride. 72% approval in Arlington. That's up 9 points since the last push, he said, glancing around the table to ensure we were all paying attention. Looks like the voters can still spot a winner. Of course they can, Vivian added, beaming at him. You've always had that leadership quality, darling, unlike some people who waste their talents chasing chaos in sandstorms. She didn't look at me. She never had to. The weight of her disdain had been calibrated over years, careful, veiled, and surgically precise. It was in the way she poured herself more wine without offering me any, in the way she folded her napkin just after I finished speaking, as if my words needed to be tucked away. Father sat across from me, his posture rigid. He chewed slowly, deliberately, like each bite distracted him from the discomfort humming through the room. He hadn't said more than a few polite hellos since I walked in. I had tried. I asked about his health, about his retirement. He smiled, nodded, and returned to his plate as though he hadn't heard. The room was all mahogany trim and inherited oil paintings, snapshots of a legacy built on discipline and appearances. No one mentioned my arrival had been unannounced. I wasn't invited. Emily had tipped me off quietly 2 days ago with a text that read, "He retires Saturday. Come if you can stomach it." I shouldn't have come, but some part of me, a smaller, more foolish version of myself, still believed in the possibility of acknowledgement, maybe not acceptance, not love, just a seat that felt mine. My fork scraped the plate too loudly. Vivian's eyes twitched toward me. I smiled. Brandon leaned back in his chair. You know, it's funny. I met a Marine major at the Capitol Mixer last week. Great guy. Tough. Covered in medals. The kind you read about. You'd have liked him, Mom. Not one of those aimless types. Emily's hand tightened around her glass. Vivian chuckled softly. Harper, have you ever considered settling down? Finding something that gives you structure? A life you don't have to keep hidden behind classified titles. I didn't answer. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't be weaponized. So I swallowed the burn in my throat and counted the seconds until I could leave. That was when the doorbell rang. Everyone turned. It was late. Nearly 10. No one else had been expected. Father began to rise but stopped halfway, spine still straight, as if unsure whether he wanted to appear curious or authoritative. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Davis, the butler we'd employed since Brandon's high school years, shuffled into view with hesitation lining his shoulders. "There's someone at the door," he said, voice thin. "He's asking for Ms. Harper." Brandon laughed. "A secret admirer?" "Who is it?" Vivian asked, mildly irritated. Davis paused. "Mr. Nathan Cross, ma'am." Everything stopped, even the clink of silver. A moment later he entered. Tall, composed, military haircut, steel gray suit that fit too well to be off the rack. Nathan Cross didn't glance at anyone else. His gaze landed on me with a calm, deliberate weight. He stopped at the head of the table. Then he saluted. "Colonel Quinn," he said, voice carrying across the cherrywood table and over the stunned silence. "The general is requesting your presence." The impact was immediate. My mother's wineglass trembled in her hand. Brandon looked like someone had just slapped him mid-applause. Emily stared at me, eyes wide with something between awe and fear. I rose without a word. No one stopped me. No one moved. As I circled the table, I felt 100 emotions thundering inside my chest. Rage, vindication, grief, but none of them showed. I kept my face neutral, posture clean, steps exact. My heels clicked across the hardwood like a verdict. Just before I stepped through the doorway, I turned. My father was watching me, not with surprise, not even confusion. He didn't look away. That's how I know. He always knew. I was trained to survive ambushes, but no one prepares you for family silence. The lock clicked softly as I turned the dial on the floor safe, muscle memory guiding me through a combination I hadn't used in over a year. The apartment was so still I could hear my own breath. Sparse furniture, no photos, just shadows stretching long under the yellow light from the single lamp by the couch. I didn't decorate because I never planned to stay. This place had always been a waypoint, not a home. The safe door creaked open. Inside, among old field notes, a rusted challenge coin, and a flash drive I hadn't touched since Berlin, sat the envelope. It was thick, white, the seal faintly cracked. Across the top, in block red, official do not delay. But it had been delayed for over 7 years, hidden by someone who should have never opened it. I traced the edge with my thumb. I remembered the day it should have arrived. I'd been in Kandahar, dodging mortar fire and writing casualty reports by candlelight. I never knew it was even sent. Richard Quinn had intercepted my promotion. A knock shattered the silence. I froze, heart jerking out of habit. But it wasn't the door. It was my secure line vibrating on the counter. Naomi. I snatched it up. Go. You're alone? As always. There was a pause on the other end, a soft breath. Then her voice dropped. Harper, we've got a problem. I stood slowly, walking toward the kitchen where the signal was stronger. Is this a status update or a red flag? Naomi never wasted words. Someone accessed Ridgepoint intel. My spine went rigid. Ridgepoint wasn't just classified, it was surgical black, buried under 5 layers of clearance and a congressional shield. Source? I asked. Terminal hit 2 days ago. Masked. Routed through a dead node in Quantico. But it matched your access log. Mine? Yes. But not from your device. From credentials. Yours. Or Logan's. Another pause. Then. And mine. The 3 of us. The original triangle. Ridgepoint's only surviving operators. My head throbbed. You sure the timestamp's clean? Yeah. And Harper. Naomi hesitated. It gets worse. The credentials were used less than 48 hours ago, just before the gala. I moved back to the safe and sat on the cold hardwood. The envelope was still in my hand. I cracked the seal, slow and deliberate. Inside, a folded letter embossed with a pentagon watermark. My name at the top. The date, July 14th, 2016. It was the promotion I never received. A personal commendation from a 4-star general, recommending me for field command and black site oversight. It had been meant to change the trajectory of my career. It never reached me. Instead, I was reassigned, derailed. And now, Ridgepoint of all things, resurfaced like a landmine I'd forgotten I buried. The screen of my phone lit up. Emily, 2246. Mom said you scared the guests. Please don't wear the uniform again. It makes people uncomfortable. I stared at the message until my vision blurred. Uncomfortable? I'd worn that uniform dragging wounded men out of cratered villages. I'd pinned it on over broken ribs. It wasn't meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be earned. I didn't respond. Naomi, I said, voice thin but sharp. Have we verified the IP's location? Closest we have is a range out of Rockville. Could be a shell. Could be real. It's tight. Any ping on Logan? None. Not since his last off-book deployment 6 months ago. He was dark then. Could still be. I pressed my fingers to my temple. So either he went rogue, or someone's building a frame. Another silence. Then Naomi said carefully, "Harper, what if Logan didn't betray you? What if someone wants you to believe he did?" The question hung in the air, dense with history and doubt. Logan Reese wasn't just my teammate. He'd once been the last person I trusted in a desert full of shadows, and now his name was tangled in a breach that could end both our careers. Or worse. I stood, holding the letter like evidence at a trial I never asked for. 7 years ago, my father stole a future from me. Now someone else might be trying to do the same, with a deeper cost. And this time, I wouldn't stay silent. He taught me how to disappear. Now he's the one hiding in plain sight. The bar was tucked between a pawn shop and a shuttered laundromat, the kind of place that didn't have a name on the door, just a neon outline of a bottle that flickered more than it glowed. We used to call it Echo, though no one ever said that out loud. It was where operatives went to become anonymous again, even just for a night. I stepped in without hesitation. The air inside was thick, sweat, old wood, and the kind of regret that never quite burned off with the whiskey. A jukebox hummed something from the 70s. No one looked up. He was already at the back booth. Black hoodie, ball cap pulled low, a drink untouched in front of him. For a moment, just one flickering second, I was back in the field, where we knew each other's breath patterns better than our own pulse. Logan Reese didn't stand when I approached. He didn't smile, just a brief tilt of his chin. An acknowledgement. That was all I'd get. I slid into the booth. My Glock brushed against my ribcage under the jacket. Reflex, not threat. "You're a hard man to find," I said. "You shouldn't have found me at all," he muttered, voice just above the hum of the bar. I studied his face. Older, tired, but it was the eyes that caught me. Alert, paranoid, and behind them, fear. "You accessed Ridgepoint," I said. Flat. "Director." His jaw clenched. "No, I didn't." "Then who did?" No answer. I glanced down. His right hand gripped the edge of the table. His left. Still. He always scratched his neck with his left hand when he was nervous. In the footage Naomi sent an hour earlier, he'd used his right. That wasn't muscle memory. That was programming. "You need to talk to me," I said, leaning in. "Because this doesn't end with a slap on the wrist. It ends with people buried under secrets they didn't make." He didn't look up. Then he slid a folded napkin across the table with his fingertips. I opened it slowly, careful not to crease the handwriting. "They're watching. We're both targets." My heart slowed. I looked back at him. He finally met my eyes, and in that one fleeting glance, I didn't see guilt. I saw warning. My phone buzzed under the table. "Naomi, encrypted line." "Talk," I whispered. "New update," she said. "That footage? The one showing Logan accessing your system? Something's off." I pressed my earpiece closer. "Off how?" "There's a 2-frame delay in the vocal sync, and the ambient hum. It's duplicated across both channels, like it was copied, then layered." "Deepfake?" "Could be. Or high-level spoofing. Either way, someone's framing him. Or you." I looked back at Logan. He hadn't moved. He whispered, "This goes higher than either of us. You know that." "You ran," I said. He nodded. "Because I knew they'd come for me. Just like they're circling you now." "Who's they?" But he didn't answer. He stood slowly, left a 20 on the table, eyes scanning the room like old habits had never died. Then, without another word, he slipped out the back door and into the fog. My phone buzzed again. Naomi's voice came through, tight, urgent. IP trace just pinged. It came from Monroe Group, tied to Brandon. My brother smiles like a campaign ad, perfectly rehearsed and utterly hollow. The first thing I noticed walking into Brandon's campaign headquarters was the sound. Not conversation, not laughter. Just the click of heels on marble and the whisper of well-oiled machines. The place didn't breathe. It functioned. Polished floors, clean angles, muted blue walls that screamed integrity while hiding everything else. His office was on the third floor, corner suite, panoramic view of the Capitol Dome. Symbolism. Always symbolism, with Brandon. He was standing by the window when I entered, phone in hand, face turned to the light like a model caught mid-thought. He didn't even glance back. "I figured you'd show up," he said smoothly, pocketing the phone. "Theatrics at dinner, then vanishing with some Pentagon relic. Very on brand." I stepped inside, letting the door shut behind me. "This isn't about the dinner." "Of course not," he said, finally facing me. "That would imply you cared about something as human as family." His smile was tight, like his suit, like the fist I imagined driving into the glass behind him. "I came to talk," I said, voice steady. "About the Monroe Group." He didn't flinch, but his pupils contracted. "You've been listening to conspiracy theorists again," he said lightly. "You know how DC is. Every building has a shadow. I know what shadows can do when you feed them." Brandon walked toward the desk, gesturing to a leather chair like we were about to discuss tax policy. I didn't sit. "The Monroe Group," I continued, "has links to 3 flagged shell companies in Luxembourg. All filed under subsidiaries tied to Greg Monroe." He raised an eyebrow. "Greg Monroe is a defense contractor. That's not illegal." "No," I said, pulling my phone from my coat pocket. "But meeting him in Malta while bills were pending in subcommittee without logging it? That's a bit messier." His jaw ticked. Naomi had sent the photo less than 5 minutes before I walked in. August 2021. Brandon, Greg Monroe, and a woman I didn't recognize, clinking glasses at a cliffside restaurant. The Mediterranean behind them was as sharp as the lies they'd tried to bury. I laid the phone on his desk. He didn't touch it. "You really came here thinking you could shake me with this?" he asked, incredulous. "You're not in a war zone anymore, Harper. This is politics. Your little code of loyalty doesn't mean anything here." I pressed record on my phone, casually, left it face down on the corner of the table. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't. But truth still does." Brandon stepped closer. "You want war, Harper? Careful. This time your scars won't win you sympathy." I held his gaze. "You think I want sympathy? Number, I want fire. And if you're standing in it when the truth drops, don't ask me for shelter." He leaned back, exhaled through his nose. "You were always dramatic. And you were always bought." I turned without another word. The door shut behind me with a soft click that felt like punctuation. I reached my car a few minutes later, parked under a shade tree across from the building. A thin manila envelope had been slipped under the windshield wiper. No note, no return address. Inside, a photo. Me, 24 years old, dust-smeared, helmet tucked under one arm, standing beside a Humvee half destroyed in the Afghan heat. Scrawled across the top in red ink, "She was always disposable." Conspiracies don't hide in the dark, they hide in the familiar. The door sealed shut behind me with a hiss, and the air inside Naomi's analysis suite was 5 degrees cooler than the hallway. Not just in temperature, everything in here felt clinical, exact, like truth was a scalpel waiting to be wielded. Red strings webbed across 3 walls, converging on a map of the eastern seaboard. Names, account numbers, shell firms, offshore transfers. It looked like madness until you stared long enough to see the shape beneath the clutter. Order born from chaos. a lattice of corruption hiding in plain sight. Naomi stood at the center, tablet in hand, eyes narrowed behind wireframe glasses. She didn't look up when I entered. "They moved another transfer last night," she said, tapping twice. 200,000. Through a Gibraltar account labeled as disaster relief. "For what disaster?" I asked. Naomi finally looked at me. "Your brother's campaign." She gestured to a cluster of red pins. "We backtracked 5 years. The Monroe Group ran 8 shell firms. At least 4 were funneled through think tanks Brandon sits on." I exhaled slowly. "So he wasn't just adjacent, he's infrastructure." Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. A shuffle behind me. I turned. Tessa Reese stepped through the secondary door, sleeves rolled, eyes alert. Logan's younger sister, once the intern who wouldn't stop asking questions. Now an investigative journalist blackballed from 2 networks and still reporting from the underground. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Tell me what you know," she said. Naomi raised an eyebrow. I nodded. "She's good," I confirmed. "She can help." Tessa pulled a flash drive from her back pocket and plugged it into the main display. 3 years ago, I submitted an exposé on unreported defense lobbying. Brandon's name was in the footnotes. The story was killed before it hit editorial. "Why?" Naomi asked. "Because the paper got a call from one of Brandon's donors, a super PAC executive who threatened to cut advertising if it ran." Naomi swore under her breath. Tessa turned to me. "Your name came up too." I tensed. "There were early drafts," she said carefully. "About your record, your commendations. I was told to paint you as unstable, damaged. But I didn't. I buried it. I couldn't do that to Logan." I didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally, "Thank you." Naomi cleared her throat. "We've compiled the timestamps of the Ridgepoint data breaches. They match precisely with 3 of Brandon's biggest campaign donations. You can't fake those correlations." "Which means," I said, moving toward the main screen, "he's not just protecting the Monroe Group, he's being paid to stay silent." "And to discredit you," Tessa added. A long silence stretched across the room. Naomi broke it first. "The gala's in 12 days. Federal honors, dignitaries, press, half the damn intelligence community." "It's symbolic," I said. "It's a trap," she corrected. "Exactly." I turned, facing both of them. "We need to build a timeline, confirm our witnesses, get Logan clear, and then let them come. I'll be waiting." Naomi didn't smile. She just looked at me with something close to mourning. "But if this fails, Harper, they won't just erase your record. They'll erase you." ChatGPT John Noy. Matt and Ta Ko O Joe. His gait, his badge. But something in the mirror said, "This isn't him." The surveillance suite smelled like ionized metal and sleepless nights. Cold LED light buzzed above us, casting pale blue shadows across the consoles. Naomi leaned forward over the monitor, eyes flicking back and forth across a slowed-down security feed, like she was watching a ghost flicker into being. "Playback frame 83, she said to the tech. "Quarter speed, overlay motion tags." The analyst tapped a few keys, and the image jerked to life. There he was. Logan Reese. His frame. His walk. The tilt of his shoulders as he moved through the doorway of the server room at Ridgepoint Command. His badge blinked against the scanner, followed by the slow green flash of approval. It looked flawless. Every pixel, every beat. Except, it wasn't. I stepped closer. My heart should have been racing, but it wasn't. It was still. Focused. "Pause," Naomi said. "There, look at the neck." The figure raised his hand, right hand, and scratched just behind the jawline. "Left," I whispered. Logan always used his left. Naomi nodded. "Exactly." We had trained for hours under stress, fatigue, simulation fire. Small habits became survival instincts. You don't fake that kind of muscle memory, not even with the best AI rig. The background tech, a lanky kid named Caleb, spoke next. Facial mapping tracks 88% match, but the blink interval is off. Too regular. Human eyes aren't that consistent. He pressed a few keys. And the audio track. It's been layered. I leaned in. A scratchy replay of Logan's voice came through the speakers. Access granted. Command authorization Harper-D-6-9-. There it was. A glitch. Barely audible. Play that again, I said. Caleb complied. Harper D-6-9. Stop. There. I turned to Naomi. He never says D, he says Delta. Every time. She glanced at me, something sharp flickering behind her glasses. This wasn't just a disguise, she said. This was built to pass inspection, but it wasn't built for someone who knew him. The tension in the room solidified. Naomi crossed her arms. They're building a legend around Logan, painting him as the leak, framing him as a threat. But he's not the goal. She looked at me. You are. My mouth went dry. They're trying to provoke a response, Naomi continued. You're too clean, too invisible. So they need a reason to remove you, and collateral damage is just cover. A new voice crackled through the intercom. Ma'am, Caleb said. We've traced the render engine used to composite the footage. Naomi straightened. Source? Model matches one previously flagged in the Capital Forward leak, used by a private cyber contractor hired by Monroe Holdings. Greg Monroe. Of course. I stepped back, letting the room settle around me. They weren't just after Logan. He was bait. The smoke to lead them to the fire they actually wanted to extinguish. Me. A notification pinged across the main screen. Naomi walked over, tapped it open. A video file, from an anonymous upload, already mirrored across 3 social platforms, metadata stripped. She pressed play. There I was, bloodied, sand-caked, eyes wide, crouched behind a scorched barricade in a combat zone I couldn't immediately place. My voice was muffled. Gunfire echoed. I was shouting, but the audio was distorted. No timestamp, no origin tag, and no context. Naomi froze. They're starting to rewrite your story, she said quietly. One clip at a time. Brandon doesn't kill people. He kills perception. Slowly, cleanly. The Capitol ballroom glowed like a postcard. Gold chandeliers, velvet curtains, the scent of imported orchids clinging to the air like privilege. Rows of round tables filled with men in lapel pins and women in pastel suits, sipping champagne and nodding to each other with that quiet DC smugness that said, "We're the good ones." On stage, a podium framed by American flags stood like a shrine to appearances. Brandon stood behind it, one hand resting lightly on the wood, the other gesturing just enough to seem passionate, but never enough to wrinkle his tailored sleeve. And in these uncertain times, he said, voice modulated to camera-friendly perfection, we need leaders who understand sacrifice, not just in theory, but in action. Polite applause. Smiles. I stood near the back, black blazer zipped halfway, heels grounded. No name tag, no smile. As he continued about integrity and service, my gaze drifted to the side of the stage. Greg Monroe was there, chatting with a lobbyist, expression unreadable. The man never blinked unless it served a purpose. Brandon's voice rose slightly. Service is not about secrecy, it's about responsibility. That was my cue. I clapped. Once, twice, too early. Heads turned. Brandon paused. Just a half-second hitch, but it was enough. I stepped forward, calm and deliberate, the way I'd walked into cleared compounds and enemy negotiations. Sorry, I said, loud enough to carry. That part about responsibility really resonated. He smiled, tight, rehearsed. Harper, you made it. Of course, I replied, Wouldn't miss a fundraiser hosted by men who bankroll shell companies in the Caymans. The room stilled. Greg's brow twitched. Brandon chuckled, easing his voice into diplomacy mode. Let's not turn tonight into a conspiracy thread, hmm? I held up my phone. Funny. That's not what this says. A soft buzz against my palm. Naomi's text came through. One image. No caption. Brandon and Greg, arm in arm, standing before a summit banner in Berlin. 2021, Defense Summit, private, unlogged. I stepped toward the projection table, dropped a stack of half-page flyers, QR codes printed clean across them. I figured everyone might want to follow along, I said. Transparency, after all. One by one, phones came out. The screen behind the stage flickered. Someone had scanned the code. The image appeared. Brandon's face drained half a shade. Greg turned, left the ballroom without a word. A murmur rippled through the guests. A general near the front arched an eyebrow. The kind of look that said, "We're watching now." Brandon tried to recover. Let's not forget tonight is about honoring veterans. Veterans like me? I said. Or the ones whose records were buried to make room for a cleaner narrative. Silence. I stepped back, letting the tension breathe. My work here was done. For now. As I neared the exit, my phone buzzed again. Naomi's voice crackled through my earpiece. Gala funds were just injected with $2.4 million, coded as community outreach. It's a shell. ChatGPT Janoi, Toi Kong Bao Gyoso Jan. What I feared was the voice I couldn't trace. The boardroom sat in eerie stillness, its long walnut table gleaming under the muted gold sconces. At this hour, just past midnight, the Silent Service Honor Gala Committee had long dispersed, leaving only whispers trapped in wood grain and upholstery. Naomi stood beside me, arms crossed, her earpiece connected to the array of wireless recorders she'd planted earlier that day, disguised as donation plaques, name badges, and one hidden behind the podium itself. She glanced at her laptop screen. Channel 5 just activated. Someone's here. I leaned in. Static, then footsteps. Leather soles over marble. The faint creak of the chair at the head of the table. Greg Monroe's voice came first. Low, rushed, tired. She'll speak, then she'll fall. The story writes itself. She's emotional. A relic in uniform. No one will question the footage once we push it through friendly media. A pause. Then, the second voice. Measured. Calm. Cold. It wasn't Monroe. Let the optics do the work, it said. After this, she's a liability. It's taken a decade to get here. We're not stopping because she's loud. The hairs on my arms stood up. Naomi's fingers hovered over her keys. She mouthed one word. Architect. The name wasn't new to me. Rumors. Debriefs scrubbed of origin. Whispers of a strategist who didn't operate on battlefields or in boardrooms. But above them, a ghost who crafted outcomes before anyone realized a game had begun. I thought he was dead, I whispered. Naomi shook her head, eyes still locked on the waveform. Only retired. Pentagon cleared him 4 years ago. But his voice print? This is a match. The recording continued. She's not your average dissenter, Monroe said. People like her. They gather sympathy, medals, losses, press angles. That's dangerous. She's been groomed for this fall since 2011, the architect replied. My stomach flipped. 11 years ago. Ridgepoint. The mission no one talks about. The one Logan never forgave himself for. The one that left us both scarred. I took a step back from the console, the weight of the years pressing into my spine. They didn't stumble into this. They built it. Around me. The recording ended with the soft clink of a glass and the shuffle of chairs. Naomi turned, face pale. He called Brandon Q2. That's not a coincidence. Q1's probably Monroe. So my brother's not just involved, I said. He's integrated. My phone buzzed before I could say more. Tessa. Her voice cracked with urgency. Harper. You need to see this. Brandon was involved in the Ridgepoint cover-up. I have proof. ChatGPT Janoi. They took my face, twisted it. They took my name, stained it. Now they want my silence? I've got none left. The hum outside my window was constant now. Press vans lined the street like vultures circling a slow death. Cameras craned for a glimpse. Flashbulbs flickered even through blackout curtains. And still, the apartment felt deafeningly quiet. The kind of silence that didn't come from peace, but from erasure. I stood in front of the wall. It had started as a place to gather clarity. Notes, clippings, deployment rosters, a red string or two. Now it looked like a battlefield of headlines. Decorated colonel accused in intel leak. Unfit for command? From valor to question mark. My photo was everywhere. Uniformed, solemn, with eyes cropped to look either defiant or guilty depending on the narrative. On the screen behind me, the doctored video played on a loop. I had muted it hours ago, but I could still feel it pulsing through the walls. In it, I looked feral. Dirt smeared, shouting, voice twisted into something unrecognizable. It wasn't real, but it was real enough for the public. The knock came soft, almost reluctant. I didn't move. Tessa pushed the door open and stepped inside without asking. She didn't say anything at first. Just handed me a folder. Plain. Worn. I opened it. The Ridgepoint file. She pointed to a page halfway through. That's his signature. Brandon's. He authorized the suppression. Your commendation. They buried it. Said it was too politically inconvenient at the time. I stared at it. The date matched the one etched in my memory. July 2016. The same month I'd been pulled from deployment without explanation. The same week my father stopped calling. That's why you never got the promotion, Tessa said quietly. My jaw locked. I remembered standing outside my father's study that day. Dress uniform starched, hands shaking with hope. I'd asked if anything had come in the mail. He'd looked at me, almost, but never fully met my eyes. Sometimes silence is noble, he said then. Don't confuse noise for strength. But he'd known. They all had. I set the file down, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water I didn't drink. My phone buzzed on the counter. Vivian. I stared at it. Let it ring once, twice. On the third, I answered. Harper, she said, voice even and cold. The press is escalating. I spoke with Brandon. It might be best for everyone if you step down, quietly. I didn't respond. I know you want to fight this, but dragging the family through another scandal. I hung up. Tessa didn't ask what she said. She didn't need to. On the table, my tablet lit up. Naomi's face appeared, jaw tight. Suspension is official, she said. Pending review. You're frozen out. For now. I nodded. She leaned closer. But you're not alone. Not this time. The words hit harder than I expected. My phone buzzed again. A text. Emily. I found something in Dad's desk. It's about you. You need to come home. I stared at it. The silence broke. I walked back to the wall, looked at the headline again. Unfit for command? I tore it down. Not in rage, but with purpose. Then I whispered, mostly to myself, I'll see them at the gala. Tessa opened her mouth to speak, but then there was another knock, this one firmer. I opened the door cautiously. No one stood there, just a small brown package on the mat. Inside, a shattered military medal, mine, and a note. You'll be remembered, one way or another. ChatGPT Janoi. Antahong Guino. But I found it, and it said everything he never could. Rain tapped the window pane like an old friend, unsure if it was still welcome. The scent of old wood, Faded cologne and dust lingered in Richard Quinn's study, unchanged since the day he stopped using it. Books lined the walls in military precision, spines stiff and orderly. His desk, heavy oak and engraved with the faint scratches of decades, sat like a relic of a man who never left anything unsaid, except to me. Emily stood beside me, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression guarded. She handed me a small metal key, worn smooth. Top drawer. He labeled it. I opened the drawer, and there it was, a black lockbox. The label on top was written in his unmistakable block letters, for Harper, if she returns. My throat clenched. Emily stayed silent, letting the moment breathe. The key turned with a soft click. Inside, nestled against dark velvet, was a metal I didn't recognize. Bronze, curved edges, engraved with my unit and a date I thought had been erased. Operation Ridgepoint. I stared at it, blinking away the sudden sting. There was an envelope beside it, yellowed, dated March 2015. I hesitated, then opened it. Harper, I never knew how to raise a daughter like you, not because you weren't good, but because you were great in ways I couldn't touch. You didn't need saving, and I didn't know how to stand beside that. When you chose service over safety, honor over comfort, I told myself you were reckless. Truth was, I was jealous. You did what I never had the spine to do. I watched you come home in pieces, watched you rebuild alone. I let your mother tell me silence was strength, but now I know. It was cowardice in a tuxedo. I see you. I always did. And I was proud. I just didn't have the words. Maybe now, these will be enough. Dad. I folded the letter with shaking hands. My legs gave slightly, and I sank onto the edge of the old reading chair, metal still clutched in one palm. I hadn't realized how deeply I'd needed to hear it, until I finally did. Emily kneeled beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine. He wrote others, she whispered. Most unsent. But this one, he left where I'd find it. I think he knew you'd come back. I let myself cry. Not long. Just enough. Then the tablet on the desk buzzed to life. Naomi's face appeared, sharp and clear. Gala's secured, she said. Guest list confirmed. Brandon and the architect will be there. Everyone that matters, all in one room. I stood, pocketing the medal. Then let's make them remember why they feared me. As I turned toward the window, something moved below. A black SUV idled across the street, engine humming softly beneath the rain. The passenger side window lowered just enough to reveal a man in a gray suit, face calm, unreadable, staring directly up at me. He didn't blink, didn't wave, just watched, and waited. ChatGPT John Noy. They dressed it in honor, they lit it in gold. But I knew. This was an ambush wearing a tux. Federal Hall had never looked more immaculate, or more like a trap. Polished marble floors mirrored chandelier light in fractured brilliance. American flags draped from 20-foot ceilings. Guests sipped champagne with fingers that had never pulled a trigger, smiling with teeth sharpened by PR firms. This was where reputation came to be reborn, or buried. I stepped through the arched entrance alone, my dress uniform immaculate. Shoes shined until they gleamed like warnings. My medals, real, earned, blood-polished, reflected the overhead lights with deliberate clarity. The crowd parted not out of respect, but uncertainty. Whispers fanned across the room like wind across dry leaves. She's here. She has the nerve. Isn't she under investigation? Exactly. Brandon stood on the dais, mid-speech, a calm hand gesture slicing through his latest soundbite. Because in service, he intoned, we rise above politics. We choose country over conflict, and unity, above all else, is the noblest command. Applause broke out, loud and orchestrated. I caught his eye. He didn't falter. He didn't smile either. Naomi's voice crackled into my earpiece, sharp and composed. Monroe just peeled off. South corridor. Logan's on him. I scanned the room. Corner table. Major Lila Mason, former recon. Her gaze flicked up to meet mine, then subtly down to her clutch. Inside it. Plan B. Contingency. I made my way to the podium. The hall quieted with an undercurrent of static tension, as though the room itself was holding its breath. I adjusted the mic. For years, I began, this gala has stood for sacrifice, for honor, for the truth that service doesn't need a spotlight to matter. Murmurs. Eyebrows lifted. I kept going. But tonight, I'd like to talk about shadows. The kind that trail service. The kind that steal names, smear honor, and operate behind doors made of glass too thick to shatter. Until now. Naomi's voice again. Logan's in position. Greg just received a call. He's sweating. Then a new voice. Logan's. Filtered through my second channel. Package is wired. One more move and it's done. And then, a glint. Far wall. Upper level. A second-floor balcony. Something metallic flicked against the light. A scope. Or maybe just a reflection. I didn't wait to confirm. From the corner of my eye, Logan moved. He tackled Greg Monroe to the ground hard and fast, like a memory crashing through time. Gasps. Shouts. Someone screamed. Security erupted like a hornet's nest. The room fractured into pockets of motion, but I stayed still. At the podium. Center stage. Logan held Monroe down, hand already raised with a small recorder in it. Blinking red. Greg's tie had shifted, revealing a hidden mic beneath his collar. He'd been wired. And now, it was all out in the open. The crowd surged with noise, some towards the scene, others away from it. But my earpiece stayed calm. Naomi again. Harper, listen carefully. The architect is in the room. Back row. Graybeard. No badge. I froze. Back row. I turned my head just enough to see a man seated with his hands folded. No nameplate, no drink. Just calm, heavy eyes that had seen the consequences of power and never regretted them. He met my gaze, and he smiled. I didn't need to fire a bullet, just a truth sharp enough to pierce every lie. The ballroom hadn't calmed. It had simply calcified. The air was no longer thick with champagne and praise, but with something colder, sharper. The quiet between gasps, between reputations cracking. I stood at the podium, the mic still hot. My fingers didn't tremble. My voice, when it returned, was ice wrapped in velvet. Some of you might be wondering what just happened. A man tackled, a microphone discovered, a room watching. The crowd leaned in, breathless. Let me answer with this. I gave Naomi the signal. The lights dimmed slightly as the projector behind me hummed to life. On screen, the audio began. Greg Monroe's voice filled the chamber. She'll speak, then she'll fall. Then the deeper voice, the one that had haunted the edges of my nightmares. Let the optics do the work. After this, she's a liability. I watched faces in the crowd harden. A senator's jaw tightened. A military aide's glass froze mid-air. 2 security agents flanked Greg Monroe as the clip ended. He didn't fight. He just smoothed his lapels, as if adjusting for a mugshot. They led him through the side exit as flashes exploded from reporters already uploading the footage to every feed imaginable. But I wasn't finished. Brandon still stood near the stage, half a step back from the podium. His smile was gone now, replaced with the measured stillness of a man calculating exits that no longer existed. I turned. In 2016, I said, a commendation for valor during Operation Ridgepoint was suppressed. The signature on the suppression order? I raised the document, photocopy blown large on the screen. Brandon's name in clean ink. Ridgepoint. Redacted lines now fully unredacted. A collective intake of breath. Tonight, I continued, the people behind that suppression are being exposed. Some, like Monroe, will face consequences. Others, like the man who stood here moments ago speaking of integrity, still think their masks will hold. Brandon took a step forward, voice low, smooth. This is orchestrated, he said. Manufactured revenge. Anyone can forge a document. They didn't forge your ambition, I cut in. Only your decency. He opened his mouth, but I beat him to it. My brother always knew how to win. He just forgot how not to lie. Gasps. Phones lifted. Live streams surged. A donor's chair scraped as she stood and left, head high, silence louder than outrage. Brandon's facade shattered not with a bang, but with a quiet, irreversible collapse. He looked small now. Polished, yes, but shrinking under the weight of eyes that had once adored him. I let the silence hang, let the moment settle like ash. Then behind me, a soft voice. Colonel Quinn. I turned. A woman in a midnight blazer, poised, measured. The committee will see you Monday morning. They didn't want truth. They wanted an admission. Or better, my silence. The Defense Oversight Committee chamber was colder than I remembered. Despite the heavy wood paneling and the faint scent of aged parchment, no press, no microphones, just 3 senators behind an arched bench, their faces carved from granite, unmoved by applause or shame. This wasn't a court. It was a gate, and they sat between me and everything I had left. I stood alone at the center table, flanked only by a single glass of water and the weight of a decade's silence. Senator Paul Grayson cleared his throat, his steely gaze pinning me in place. Colonel Quinn, he said, voice dry as dust, do you deny that, during Operation Ridgepoint in 2011, you signed off on a summary that omitted fatality details and compromised data? No, I said, voice firm. I signed it, under directive. I was 23, fresh out of field certification. My superior officer, Logan Reese, delivered the wording. I trusted him. I shouldn't have. A beat. And yet, Grayson said, you continued to rise through the ranks. Decorated. Untarnished. Until now. They buried what mattered, I said, jaw tight. Not to protect me, but to build a story they could sell. Ridgepoint wasn't just suppressed. It was redesigned. A shift in posture from the woman to Grayson's left, Senator Morales. You're suggesting this was systemic. I'm not suggesting, I replied. I'm stating. The architect, real name classified, oversaw strategic misinformation campaigns across multiple units. My brother, Brandon Quinn, facilitated internal suppression orders. We have his signature. We have the trail. As if on cue, Naomi stood from her seat against the wall and stepped forward, handing the clerk a folder. Verified documents, she said crisply. Dates, authorizations, internal memos, tied to both Greg Monroe and Brandon Quinn, tied to Ridgepoint. The senators flipped through the pages in silence. Then, from behind me, Tessa stepped forward. She placed a hard drive onto the table with both hands. My name is Tessa Reese, she said, voice trembling just slightly. Logan Reese is my brother. He nearly died at Ridgepoint. He was instructed to falsify the report. And later, he was marked as a potential leak. This drive contains a recording, his confession, and the threats made against him should he speak. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Senator Grayson leaned back in his chair, fingers tented beneath his chin. He exhaled. Colonel Quinn. I met his eyes. You're not without fault, but you didn't hide behind privilege. That matters. A flicker of movement. He tapped his gavel once. This committee will not recommend your removal. Further action on your case is closed. My breath locked. Grayson turned to the aide beside him. However, we will be launching a formal investigation into Capital Forward and its shell subsidiaries. Immediately. Naomi touched my arm as I sat down again. Her hand didn't shake. Neither did mine. Outside, the corridor was empty save for one figure leaning against the wall. Emily. She looked up as I approached. Eyes red, fingers curled around something small. "He wrote this for you," she whispered. "The day he died. I just found it." She placed a folded note in my palm. I didn't open it. Not yet. It didn't heal me, but it explained him. The rain had returned, soft and steady against the windows of the Quinn house, like a refrain from a song I hadn't asked to hear twice. The study smelled the same: old ink, cedar polish, and something fainter, like pages turned but never read. The folded flag still sat in the corner, untouched since his funeral. A quiet monument to a man who'd made his life about control and duty, and who never once said the words I needed to hear. Until now. The letter weighed nothing, but it felt heavy in my hand. The paper was thinner than I remembered military stock to be, almost translucent when held up to light. Emily had left me alone to read it. I didn't ask her to. She just knew. I unfolded it. "Harper, I don't know how to begin this because everything I want to say, I should have said when you were 6 and wore my old boots into the backyard and saluted your mother like she was the commander-in-chief. You were always going to outrun me. I knew it the day you turned down that corporate internship to enlist. I knew it when you came home with scars and didn't flinch. I feared it. Feared becoming a shadow in your rear view. And that fear made me quiet when I should have been proud. But I was proud. Every damn day. I just didn't know how to say it without sounding small next to you. Your strength isn't loud. It's in how you walk into fire without asking who lit it. It's in how you stand alone when others kneel for comfort. I never taught you that. You taught me. I won't ask forgiveness, Harper. I don't deserve it. But I hope, one day, you'll understand why I stayed silent, and that understanding will be enough. Dad. I let the paper fall onto the desk. My fingers stayed clenched, not in anger, but in containment. If I let go too quickly, I might shatter. Emily entered quietly, her arms crossed but not closed. She stood beside me, looking not at my face, but at the letter. "He read it out loud once," she said, then folded it and said, "She's stronger than I ever was. She deserves better than this." And he put it away. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. We stood there in silence, the kind that didn't accuse, the kind that listened. Later, I walked into the hallway, past framed photographs, the curated gallery of Quinn achievement. Brandon in his tailored suits, Emily in her valedictorian sash, my father saluting on deployment. And now, finally, me. I added my official military portrait to the center frame, me in uniform. Chin steady, eyes forward. Vivian watched from the stairs. She didn't speak, didn't offer apology or protest, just met my eyes, then turned away. That was enough, for now. I stood before the wall, hands in my pockets, letting the weight of memory settle into something less suffocating. "Not for them," I whispered, "not against them. For me." My phone buzzed. A text from Naomi. "The president's office is asking. They want you at the Pentagon on Veterans Day. They used to call me the quiet one. Now they say my name with respect, and just a little fear." The wind off the Potomac carried a clean kind of cold, the kind that made you stand straighter without realizing it. The sun hung steady in a clear sky, its light catching on brass pins, polished shoes, and folded flags that rippled with solemn rhythm. The Pentagon courtyard had never felt so open, or so watchful. I stood center stage, The Secretary of Defense read from the prepared citation, his voice even, practiced. For unwavering service, moral clarity under political pressure, and conduct that reflects the highest traditions of leadership. The words blurred. I heard them. I accepted them. But they didn't define me. They weren't meant to. He stepped forward, pinning the medal just below my collarbone with the care of someone who understood both what it meant and what it cost. When the applause came, it was brief, respectful. No fanfare, just the way I preferred it. The press swarmed soon after. Colonel Quinn, what's next for you? I met their gaze, letting the quiet stretch. Then I smiled. No comment. That earned a few chuckles. Enough. Off to the side, Emily stood in a navy coat, her hands gloved but her eyes warm. Logan leaned beside her, an easy posture disguising the scars still healing beneath his shirt. Naomi flanked the other side, silent, sharp, ever aware. Family and duty, both within reach, both earned. A retired general stepped through the crowd. I remembered him vaguely from a Kabul briefing years ago. His face had weathered, but his posture hadn't. Colonel Quinn, he said, extending a hand. This institution is lucky you stayed. I shook his hand, meeting his eyes. Number. It's lucky I came back on my own terms. He nodded and moved on. I turned, stepping away from the podium, my heels crunching softly on the gravel path. The flagpole loomed ahead, half-mast, solemn and resolute. I paused at its base, letting the silence expand around me. Then I whispered, just for me. I'm still here. A buzz in my coat pocket. I pulled out the phone. Encrypted message. Naomi's signature key. Subject line. Ridge point. Level 2. No body. No file preview. I sighed. And then I smiled. Even in a room built to silence truth, Harper stood taller than every whisper, every doubt they had ever cast on her name. What they once called defiance, they now call integrity. Because when the masks fell, hers was the only face still standing. Like a final chord from a melody long suppressed, justice may arrive late. But when it comes, it silences every lie with resonance. Sometimes it takes walking alone through betrayal to remind the world that quiet strength isn't weakness, it's strategy. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Comment 1 if you felt seen in Harper's fight. Comment 2 if you're still waiting for your own justice.